I had to relocate back to my hotel room because people apparently with PhDs don't understand the concept of in a large room not coming and standing by the one guy who's talking to his computer. So, oh well, higher education can't do everything for you. So the Gospel of Matthew. We venture into the New Testament. We ended with the Old Testament looking forward in the book of Malachi for hope. Hope signaled by the coming of an Elijah figure. And then also the prophetic hope of restoration of Israel, and the Davidic king Zechariah's hope of both the priestly, kingly sort of figure in the Davidic reign. And we come to the book of Matthew. The author of the book, though not without debate, is the Apostle Matthew, or Levi, in the book of Mark, the son of Alphaeus. He was a tax collector and was and got up, walked away from that to follow Jesus. The date is anywhere between AD 40 and AD 70, probably around 66 and 69, and the place is either in Antioch or Palestine with regard to the provenance of where Matthew is and where he's writing from. The outline of the book itself begins with the declaration of the birth of Jesus, the coming of Jesus. Probably one of the most mind-blowing aspects of Christianity is the historic and biblical proclamation that God Himself is the baby Jesus. That Jesus is God the Son, God wrapped in flesh. 100% God, 100% man. Your head might pop off like the Jet.com commercials. Thinking about that for too long, it is a remarkable and mysterious truth. The birth and preparation of Jesus, though, is in the first 4 chapters. That's where you find the birth of Jesus. That's where you find Jesus as a 12-year-old boy going to the temple and making the declaration to his mother and father he should be about his father's business. Jesus' public and private ministry begin in chapter 4, move all the way through chapter 18. Here you find Matthew's account of Jesus as preacher of righteousness, Jesus as fulfiller of covenant promise from the prophets of the Old Testament. Matthew's particularly interested in that. We'll talk about that in a second. Here you find Jesus spending a great deal of time with his disciples, explaining parables to them, shaping them for ministry. In Judea, in chapter 19, headed to 25, you see Jesus sort of taking his final turn in Judea, and from this point forward, all of his ministry and all of his proclamation is aimed towards his passion that we see in chapter 26 and following, and his crucifixion, resurrection, ascension in chapter 28, leaving us with the words that he has now been granted all authority in heaven and on earth, and because of that authority to go now into the world and make disciples. So Christianity in and of itself, rooted in the Gospels, is proselytizing sort of religion. It's proselytizing not in the sense of asking people to exchange their moral package for our moral package, even though that might happen. But if that happens in an ancillary way. It is the declaration that there is a God that is holy, and He is the judge of all the earth, and without flinching, and won't give help to anyone, and that mankind stands as completely bankrupt in front of Him, with no resources, no good deeds that count well enough for righteousness, and that Jesus now has come. And He is God Himself has come to rescue us. It's been said that the Gospels demonstrate that Christianity is very different from all the other religions in the world, in that all the other religions in the world give advice. They say you should live like this, or you should seek God like this, and in seeking God and living right, then God will meet you at some point. And it's true, that is what every religion does, except of course for Christianity. Christianity declares that God Himself has come to rescue us, and rescue sinners and His enemies, which is comprised of human beings in total, and that those human beings are now rescued by God Himself, wrapped in flesh, coming to fulfill His own promises, restore His own people, and then declare that good news should not be kept hidden, but should actually go outward. And so that's the idea, and we see it located particularly in all the Gospels, but Matthew in particular, with what is seemingly a very stalwart declaration of proselytization at the end of the book. So a few things that are key themes in Matthew. One is the fulfillment formula. Matthew, more than any other gospel, utilizes the fulfillment formula primarily because the fulfillment formula is linked to the Old Testament. Lots of explicit Old Testament quotations in Matthew. Matthew's primary audience was Jewish. So these were Jewish Christians who had emerged out of Judaism, had embraced Christianity. It would have been a big deal to embrace Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament rather than the nation, the people of Israel, as a fulfillment of Hebrew Bible in that sense. And so Matthew exposes a great many texts in hopes that his readership will know and understand that there's reason to believe that Jesus is in fact the fulfillment of this. It's almost used in that way. For example, in our notes here, Matthew 8:17 says that this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses, bore our diseases. Matthew chapter 2 quotes Isaiah again, that this is in fact what was to fulfill the prophet Isaiah. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. It's in the context back in Isaiah chapter 7 of Isaiah being confronted with the Syro-Ephraimite conflict, the attack of the northern kingdom of Israel and the king of Damascus, and the prophecy was trust in God. God has been our divine warrior, and He will grant a son that will demonstrate and prove that He's in our midst, ready to redeem us, ready to rescue us. Of course, Ahaz didn't buy any of that, but the New Testament writers believe that this appearance of Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that prophecy, and it shows that Jesus is in fact the Messiah, the promised Emmanuel child. Immanuel in Hebrew is God with us, and this is God in the flesh with us on the earth, demonstrating that God has come to wage war against the enemies of humanity, namely death and sin and self. And so those fulfillment themes are fairly significant. A key theme also is Jesus as the Old Testament's Messiah. This would have been a radical idea in Jewish minds in the first century Palestinian Judaism, but yet here you have it. You've got in chapter 16, verse 16, and chapter 26, verse 63, you've got Jesus stated as the Messiah, the Son of David, referencing back to 2 Samuel chapter 7. Emmanuel, I quoted, I said it was in chapter 2, it's actually in chapter 1, my apologies. Son of God, chapter 3. Just briefly on the Son of God, one of the unique things that you hear people who don't have a great deal of knowledge in the Old Testament, in the New Testament rather, is that they will understand Son of God in the same kind of way that my son Jonathan is my son. So Jonathan is just simply not me at all. He's just he's not even a me 2.0. He's his own guy, and he's so my daughters are their own women, and they just happen to be related to me. I'm their father. I'm the biological donator of their existence. Yet that's not how Son of God was understood in any way, shape, or form. If you turn to John chapter 5, verse 17-18, you'll see that first century Palestinian Jews understood Son of God to be a claim that you made yourself equal with God. Jesus says to the people that he's talking to that his father is always working, so he's working as well, and they wanted to kill him on the spot, primarily because he had claimed that God was his father, making himself equal with God. So when you see Son of God all throughout the Gospels, understand that first century Palestinian Jews would have heard him say, I am equal with God. There's something about me that's God, and that would have been that's what was so controversial about it. He's the new Moses, the Son of Man, the servant of God, the wisdom of God, King of Israel. Which is, by the way, what that whole genealogy is about: son of Abraham, son of David. At the beginning of the book, he's the eschatological ruler of the world, the chief cornerstone, and the bridegroom. He's also the new Moses, and this is really a prominent idea. He's one prominent Old Testament character in which Matthew compares Jesus to Moses. In the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, Moses was the man who God used to first lead the Israelites out of slavery into Egypt and take them to the Promised Land. And by comparing Jesus to Moses, Matthew is telling us that Jesus is now leading his people out of slavery to sin, not Egyptians, and to the Promised Land where we will dwell with God. Some comparisons are here. Moses threatened with death by Pharaoh as a baby, along with all the other Hebrew babies. Jesus, likewise, is threatened by Herod as a baby, along with all the other Hebrew babies, male babies. Moses returns from exile after his enemies die. Jesus returns from exile in Egypt to Nazareth after Herod dies. Moses leads Israel through temptation in the wilderness. Jesus stands in Israel's place and successfully withstands temptation of Satan. Moses gives the law. Jesus gives proper understanding of the law in Matthew 5 through 7, what's typically called the Beatitudes. Moses shines with God's glory after going up to Sinai. Jesus shines with God's glory, the Father's glory, after on the Mount Transfiguration. Moses leads Israel to reinaugurate the Exodus and the Passover meal. Jesus ends his ministry and starts toward the cross with the Last Supper and his disciples the night of the Passover. Moses brings the plagues of God's judgment in Egypt, the ninth of which is darkness and death, and the 10th firstborn. Jesus' death and the death of the firstborn is preceded by darkness, representing Israel yet once again as much as Moses. Moses issues his final words to people from a mountain before they are to enter the Promised Land, and Jesus issues his final commission to the statement before they go take the gospel to the world. So remarkable setup there. And we've already talked about that sort of the outline of Matthew. Matthew is broken down, and the infancy narrative, which begins with this genealogy, like I said a while ago, that establishes Jesus as the son of David. The only other time the phrase is used is in the book of Genesis 2:4 and 5:1, this genealogy. Matthew is comparing Jesus' birth to the original creation. In other words, Jesus is restoring creation. Jesus Christ is the son of David and the son of Abraham, the Messiah that is the Christ. John the Baptist becomes that Elijah figure that, in fact, Malachi talks about and identifies Jesus as the King of the Jews, identifies him as a suffering servant who will die. The first huge narrative section, like we said early on, is Jesus, both his temptation, his first preaching of the ministry in chapters 4. Each temptation quotes from Deuteronomy, where Jesus is once again quoting from the Deuteronomic book while in the desert. You go back to the Pentateuch in Numbers 13 and 14. There's this collapse in 40 years in the desert where there is nothing but death from God, Israel, and they end up on the plains of Moab and presented with Deuteronomy prior to going over into the land. Jesus is in the desert for 40 days, mimicking Israel yet once again, and quotes from Deuteronomy as he moves into the land, succeeding where Israel failed to preach the gospel. Jesus provides a proper interpretation of the law, the Sermon on the Mount. All of these things mimic Jesus as the real Israel. And this is, of course, significantly important, carried over and on into Jesus' miracles, the miracles that he performs, the miracles that he performs over nature, the miracles that he performs in studying the law, all reestablishes Jesus as the new Israel, the new Moses, the son of David. All of these things are very important, like I said earlier, to Matthew's outline. Ending, of course, with this remarkable declaration of Jesus' authority and his desire for his people to take that authority and move out with great compassion and intention into the world.